pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Don't you like the grapefruit and the seal in the chamber? Here, I do.
Goes to an elk, you mean?
First item is, our second item is approval of the minutes from the January 10th meeting. Anybody have any changes, deletions? If not, we need a motion, please.
Move to adopt as presented.
Motion to accept, say aye, please.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Item 3 is an item not on consent. It's the landings, a request for a preliminary plat approval for a commercial subdivision to be known as the Landings. John McCoy.
Thank you, Commissioner Hamner. This is a request by North American Properties for preliminary plat approval for the Landings, which is a commercial subdivision, and a plat over the site plan. And essentially, they've submitted a site plan for the infrastructure improvements, which are the roadways, the utilities, the stormwater for the subject site. And this plat will overlay that. The subject site's located at the northeast corner of US 1 and 53rd Street. Property to the east is zoned RM6, and that's part of Grand Harbor. Grand Harbor also owns the property to the north, across the North Relief Canal, which is zoned PD. And then to the west of the subject site's US 1 and some commercial property. There's a Shell station to the west, as well as a mini storage, and there's vacant commercial property to the south. That's shown on the aerial and give you a feel for the physical features. Again, the Grand Harbor property is immediately to the east, and that's where you see those lakes. The Landings is labeled there in the center, and it was the site of the old Whisper Lakes Golf Course. You can see the parking lot there at the very south end, and then the green area is the golf course driving range. As far as the physical layout of the plat, the plat's proposing 3 parcels, 3 commercial parcels, 1 lot on 53rd Street, 1 lot at the corner of US 1 and 53rd Street, and then 1 lot on US 1 for the 3 lots. There's 1 tract also, and the tract will overlay the roadway and utilities, and that will be where the infrastructure that's actually constructed with this plat's going to go. And then there's 1 parcel which is to the north of the subject site, and that's essentially an area reserved for future development. Traffic circulation is probably the biggest item, and I'd like to cover that now. There are 3 driveways proposed to service the subdivision, 1 on US 1 and 2 on 53rd Street. The eastern driveway on 53rd Street is a full movement driveway, meaning you can turn in from any direction, you can turn out and go any direction. So there will be a left turn lane to support this driveway, and also a right turn lane that will serve this driveway. The next driveway on 53rd Street, which is to the west of this driveway, is a right in, right out only. There'll be a median that will restrict other movements, and it will have a right turn lane that will service that driveway. And that's the same with the only driveway on US 1. It'll be a right in, right out only. There'll be a median that will restrict any other movements, and there'll be a right turn lane that will service that driveway. There are a couple of other items I'd like to touch on as far as traffic goes that aren't actual physical improvements. The applicant's going to need to contribute funds for a signal that may be allowed, and that signal, if it is allowed, will be at the eastern driveway on 53rd Street to help traffic get in and out of that driveway. And that signalization will be facilitated with the widening of the roadway, and once the warrants are met, and that's something traffic engineering would look at on an ongoing basis. They'll need to contribute $20,000, a little over $20,000 for dual southbound left turn lanes, and that's on US 1 right here. Right now there's a single left turn lane southbound, but there'll be duals, so when you turn in, you'll have 2 lanes of traffic turning, making the southbound to eastbound left maneuver. There's an existing signal here at 53rd and US 1, and the proposed signal is at that driveway. There's also a developer's agreement. What you see on the slide is the configuration of 53rd Street as it will be after the widening, and that's what the developer's agreement is for, is to cover that widening, some right-of-way dedication, and some other items. As far as required improvements, there are sidewalks required along US 1, 53rd Street, and some internal sidewalks that are required along the main driveway. Other internal sidewalks will be built when the site plans are constructed on the individual lots. There's also right-of-way dedication for 53rd Street, and again, that's going to be covered in the developer's agreement. They have agreed on a price, and there'll be project lighting installed with the project. As far as stormwater management, the applicant has an agreement with the Grand Harbor property to the east, or the owner of the Grand Harbor property, to use the lakes on that site for stormwater, and those were sized to service this property. And what the applicant's going to need to do is provide the county an easement to use those lakes for stormwater management, and that easement will need to be provided prior to issuance of a land development permit waiver for this development. As far as the landscape plan with the subdivision, it's essentially just covering the perimeter of the property and interior street trees. There is a buffer with a 6-foot opaque feature required along the east property line, which is adjacent to the Grand Harbor owned parcel, and they are actually looking at using a 6-foot berm that exists on the Grand Harbor property for that 6-foot opaque feature. And in order to do that, they'll need to get a landscape easement from Grand Harbor, and again, that'll be prior to issuance of a land development permit waiver. We'll be looking to see that easement from Grand Harbor, and they've gotten an understanding that that'll work out. As far as environmental issues, the site was an old driving range, so environmental planning staff has verified that there are no native uplands that exist on the site, and there are some specimen trees. Tree mitigation will occur on this site for those trees that are greater than 12 inches in diameter, and the tree mitigation has been approved by our environmental planning staff. With that, I'd like to get to the staff's recommendation. The staff does recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission grant preliminary plat approval with the conditions as recommended by staff. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any questions of staff?
I'm sorry. The signal on 53rd east of US 1, that's going to be just an on-demand light that, it's going to be Inter River Boulevard and 53rd, is that right?
I'm going to let Chris answer that question, but it'll be similar to the light that's for the Publix at 12th Street there.
Hi, Chris.
Yes, Chris Moore, Assistant Public Works Director for the county. Yes, there'll be a demand light that will normally stay green for 53rd Street, but if there's demand to come out of the development, then it would get a green light.
Okay, that's what. Yes. That was the right answer.
Yeah.
I did not, John, I didn't understand the stub out. You've got, and it's not any big issue, but behind lot 3, the driveway stubs out, and just looking at the way the reserve is laid out now, I didn't understand how they were going to, you could have a connection there. Is that something that Grand Harbor desires?
It is, and again, they've been in ongoing talks.
It's laid out.
Correct.
It's like they're going to have to modify something. Just looking at the property. So.
They've been in ongoing talks with Grand Harbor about these 2 easements, and Grand Harbor is considering some other options with that property. So Grand Harbor has asked them to do that, and at some point in time there may be a connection at that point.
I would assume so because you all put it in, but okay, all right. Any other applicant? Oh, I'm sorry.
A rhetorical question, I guess I expect an answer, though. But if they're going to use these lakes, these 2 ponds over here for the water retention for this area, they've got these platted over there, as I remember already. What's going to happen when they try to build those houses there? Where are they going to get the water retention for those houses they're going to put over there?
The retention area has been sized for both the residential and the commercial.
Both? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. That was a good answer.
Anybody else?
I have one question. This indicates that the developer's agreement will be required for the widening of 53rd in the area of the subdivision. The westbound right turn lane and the eastbound left turn lane will be covered under the developer's agreement. But it also mentions that the U.S. Highway 1 turn lane will need to be constructed prior to issuance of a certificate of completion for the infrastructure site plan. I assume that's the developer's expense for that, or is it not?
That's correct. That's a site-related improvement.
Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Would the applicant care to be heard? Thank you. The applicant does not wish to be heard. Does anybody have a motion?
So move.
Jerry, and second by Mr. Lawrence. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Barquette. As for this evening on action of development in nature, this is it. We have next item is commissioners' matters. Does any commissioner have a matter?
Yes, I do.
Yes, sir.
I was in contact with Stan the other day, questioning about regulations and rules on constructing windmills. It's been brought to my attention that the power companies may be required to find alternate forms of energy, such as windmills and solar fields, in place of fossil fuels. And I was wondering if we had any regulations, and he said at this point we don't for commercial large-scale windmills.
Read about Fort Pierce. So
Right, and I suspect it was going to be a problem here if it comes through. We be like the old cell phone tower situation. Best to maybe have something beforehand before they come before us with the windmill, some kind of regulations and location, because these things could be 300 feet in height.
Yeah, they're big.
And some people would be disturbed by it, but some people might not. So I was talking, Stan said he might look into that.
Yeah, Stan Bowling, County Planning Director. Just a couple of things about the existing regulations that we have now. The only types of windmill structures that we've seen, and we see very few of them over the years, are accessory structures to existing residences, and they're on the order of 30 to 40 feet tall, and they're allowed as an accessory structure. The height requirements for the county specifically exempt several different types of structures, such as steeples, but also windmills and silos. So there is an exception to the countywide, generally 35-foot height requirement for windmills. Now, with respect to a windmill farm, if it were a electric generating type of facility, we would classify it as such, and it would be treated as one of we've got light or heavy utility uses, like if you had a power plant.
Even what about, in Fort Pierce, though, what they're talking about is a prototype, which is like 1 or 2. I mean, to a certain extent, if that's what they're using for as energy, would they classify that as energy?
Well, it would depend on, I think, the way our definitions read now, how much it would be generating, and whether you're dealing with a windmill farm or a couple of large facilities that generate a lot of wind. It may very well be that if the coastal areas are the only areas in our region that make sense at all, even for a prototype, and we probably have very limited areas in this county that you can even possibly install.
START as a whole is not real high on their list there, but he's right that the state or someone could require this, and Florida Power and Light will be happy to put in 3 or 4, make the feel-good
That's exactly what it'll be.
attempt. And I don't, I'm not sure what we would do about it, except we could limit the height restrictions or something, at least as a fix, so they had to come. We didn't just have to accept it to begin with, I think.
Yeah, we need something up front.
That's my point.
Huh? Right. Now, of course, if the alternate fuel and the wind helps generate power out of peels of grapefruit, then I'm all in favor of it. We'll change them.
Well, which it could happen very easily.
Is there any problem with it putting in egg 1, egg 2, egg 3 right now?
Wait a minute.
No, it could, a windmill farm, just like the Calpine power plant, it would be like that. It would come under the public utilities heavy.
Correct.
But I'm thinking more like 1 or 2 or 3, because that's all they're talking about in Fort Pierce right now. Actually, they're talking about 1 today. I mean, right now.
Yeah, and from what I read, Florida isn't a real good state for wind-generated power, and I think it would be like the St. Lucie County situation. Any windmills would probably have to be on the Barrier Island where the wind is better. And if you look down in St. Lucie County, I think FPNL is recognizing that the economics aren't there for them to go out and buy a piece of beachfront property
looking
to
at
do it.
state-
They're trying to
they're
put it
looking
on
at
a
state.
parkland or state land.
We got RC car, I mean, there's,
Yeah, and I don't think, most of our conservation lands are sufficiently restricted that that couldn't be done. I think that's what you're seeing down in St. Lucie County, too.
But the problem is going to come up just like the sand mining and the coquina mining. It's essentially an industrial use next to a residential, well, is going to be a residential subdivision sooner or later. You can put it on A1, A2, A3, but those blades, if you've ever heard one, those blades are noisy.
Well, not the newer technique.
Oh, yeah.
Is,
Would you turn your
much
mic on,
more-
Doctor?
Pardon?
turn your mic on, please, Richard.
I think it is on.
I've been to the new ones. I've been to the new ones in out west of LA and out in Arizona, and they're noisy. There's just no way getting around it. But we ought to look at something on the books before everybody jumps in here and they
That's
jump down
that's
our
my
throat.
point. Up front,
It only
start
happens
something.
After the fact, I
Right.
would really encourage you to
I
put
guess
something
that,
on the
I
books.
guess what you mean, I'm not sure that we need to rewrite the rules tonight, but I
No.
think the
No.
point is that
To look
we've raised
into
the
it.
issue, and we need for Stan and Bob to look at this, and I
Exactly.
think that there are some legitimate concerns about whether it's just visual appearance, noise, and not in my neighborhood, if you want to consider that, but it is to be sure we are covered, so we don't get blindsided on a single tower. I think the farm is covered, but I'm thinking more in the terms of one or
onesie,
two.
twosies.
And these are quite large,
Right.
They're huge.
300 feet.
One of the best places in the country, they've decided, was right off of Nantucket.
Yeah.
And that didn't fly too well.
They're not happy about that at all.
And off of Long Island, too.
The one location I'm thinking about would be the firehouse out on, near A1A, 512,
Right.
510.
510, yeah.
That would be, that's public property, and that's what's being allowed in the St. Lucie County area, public properties?
They looked at this county land, and then they moved to the state lands. This is the last move where they're looking now.
Yeah, I think the county conservation land was severely restricted and couldn't accommodate it. And from what I read,
This
they are
term-
looking at the state land because it might be less severe.
I think the simplicity of this is that the issue's been raised, and you all need to look at this. We don't need to write a whole bunch of rules or whatnot. We
not
may
that
be
urgent.
covered. It's either tell us where to look or just reassure us again. And the only thing would be to look at the single doubles more so than this industrial
It's
area.
possible they could put it on the Vero Beach utility property, maybe, by the bridge there on
Oh,
the,
that'd make a lot of people happy.
yeah, 17th Street Bridge, or,
It could, but we couldn't write regulations to cover the city or.
yeah, oh,
anything
that's
else.
true, yeah.
Right.
You mentioned,
But I think that's a good point. So I think they can get back to us. Is that
Yeah,
acceptable? We don't
that's
need,
all.
I don't think we need a motion or anything.
No, just that, worthwhile investigating now.
you mentioned solar panels, and let me mention to you that when I was on the board for FMPA, Florida Municipal Power Association, we did a study of what it would take to power Orlando with solar panels. You have to have somewhere around 600 to 700 square miles of solar panels. So I don't think you need to worry about that one, because
Well, that wouldn't be.
That's not gonna happen.
That wouldn't be objectionable, I don't think, out in the farm area.
that would be to me. That would be to me.
They could cover the turnpike and I-95. We drive in the shade. That'd
Well,
work.
I think the requirement's going to, they only have to have a percentage of their power generating that non-fossil, so they're not going to
But there
go
is
full-blown.
percentages and their requirements
Yeah.
coming down
That's
for
where
them
the
to pursue it. Okay, is there anything else under Commissioners' matters?
No.
If not, we will move a charge ahead to the further discussion on sand mines under planning matters. We got anything, planning package, and anything other than talking about sand mines briefly?
No, I'd like to go ahead and start. This evening's agenda was light, and so staff wanted to take the opportunity to begin the process and jump right into it. That we're obligated to go through and really need to go through as basically as quickly as we can during the moratorium period. And the first step in the process, and this is an overall process that the Board of County Commissioners has okayed, that staff have presented to them recently, and that is to start with background information on mining and provide this to you all and have a discussion on that tonight. However, this is not a public workshop. There will be advertised public workshops over the next several months, but this is just a background information item.
A couple of other things just to let you all know that staff has created an email group for interested parties. We've had several people contact us. And so besides having this information available under your packet under the P&Z website, we've also emailed information to interested parties, and we're adding to that list as we get people to contact us. But very soon we will also create a place on the homepage of the county website. There'll be a central place where anybody could go, including you all and staff, to look at all the information as it emerges over the next several months. So we'll have kind of a central location online for that. A couple of other things before I summarize the background information that we've given you all so far. Just to remind you all of something that's obvious, and that is that planning staff do not have expertise in a lot of these areas that we're going through, and part of the process here is to invite experts and hear from people that have expertise in different fields. And so even some of the background information I'm going to go over tonight, I am very open to being added to or corrected by experts. I'm not a legal expert, and certainly sometimes at some points we'll be getting into hydrology and other matters, and there are other folks to hear from on that. But what we tried to do with this background information, there's so much of it, is to sift through it and get you all at least the highlights so that you get at least some background and some perspective on it. The other thing that I do want to point out that became obvious to staff is we've been going through information for the last 6 weeks or so, is that you have not only experts but competing experts, and you may very well hear experts giving you advice or opinions that don't seem to line up. And in those cases, obviously, this is just part of balancing out interests and trying to look at the end game, which is regulations. A couple of things I'd like to go over with a PowerPoint presentation here. And this is really just a kind of summary of the background information that you do have. On January 7th, the board adopted a 6-month moratorium on accepting or processing mining applications, and then at the following week, the board approved a staff recommendation for the Planning and Zoning Commission to basically be the committee that manages a process that involves public workshops and reviews the mining regulations. So we kind of got you all into this situation in a sense, and but we think you're the right committee to be doing that. A summary of the process is background information as well as updates that staff will be sending to you, because there's information and some other activities are going on at the state level and other local governments, and we'll be updating you with that information over the next several months. We also look to have a mobile workshop soon for board members and P&Z members to look at a sand mining operation in Indian River County, and then the nearest Coquina operation, the one in St. Lucie County, we think we'll be able to look at, to actually go out there and see it during a daytime workshop. And then a series of public workshops by topic with staff reports for backup before the workshops and experts invited. And then the overall task of formulating draft regulation changes for the board to consider, report back to the board, and then have the board provide direction. And assuming that they determine that a formal adoption of new regulations is needed, they can give direction at that point, and we can go through the formal adoption process. And staff has just finished a draft schedule I'd like to go over with you all at the end of your meeting tonight later on. So we'll go over that in more detail, actually, what that looks like on a timeline. Just briefly, the mining history. The first regulations that Indian River County had for mining were adopted in the 1970s. And during the 70s and 80s, especially, the Atlantic Coastal Ridge was the primary location for mining. After that, mines tend to move off the ridge and go into other locations, and that's kind of the situation now. Currently, mines are allowed in agricultural districts, and we have 2 sections in particular you all are familiar with. I know Chapter 934 mining regulations, and then 971.22 where we have some specific land use conditions, criteria. This map I wanted to point out before I talk about what other jurisdictions do with respect to their mining regulations. And this is a map that came from a study commissioned by DOT. It was issued in March of 2007, and you have excerpts of this study in your backup material, and you have this map in your backup material, and it's pretty important. What it outlines in the green areas are larger managed environmental areas, and then in terms of aggregate, which is mostly in this example going to be lime rock, or limestone mining, coquina and harder type of resource aggregate. And the major locations are important for us to understand when you're looking at regulations of other counties, to realize if that county has a lot of mining activity and is in a resource area or not. Probably the primary resource area for aggregate is in the Miami-Dade area, the Lake Belt region, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later. But this is the primary area, but there are other areas. Palm Beach County has a large area. Lee County and some of Charlotte and Collier County, another large resource area, actually second to the Lake Belt area in terms of production. There's one here kind of centered around Lake Wales, another big one here at the Bend on the peninsula. Levy County, Sumter, Hernando, those areas, and then Taylor and Dixie also, some very large mining operations and aggregate mining areas. If you see these smaller dots, those are kind of standalone locations, but they're considered limestone mining sites that have a high enough quality material to be to meet DOT's specifications, which is a high standard. And so DOT is showing us here all the areas that are critical to getting aggregate resources and mining areas. So you can see that Indian River County, which is actually up in here, is a long way away from any of these major resource areas, and the closest mine that has DOT specification material and can serve DOT projects. And by the way, DOT is not the only one that looks for that quality material. Indian River County and other local governments use the DOT specification as well. This is the one in northern St. Lucie County off of Indrio Road. Staff has had the chance to visit, and operated by Dickerson. That might be a place where we can go and take a look at it. But that's the closest mine that's even on the radar screen, so to speak, as far as this overall state study. So again, when you're looking at regulations from other jurisdictions, it's probably good to refer back to this map to see if they're dealing with large-scale operations, or if they're a county that maybe, like Indian River, that doesn't even have a coquina or lime rock type of operation in it. The first set of background materials we gave you are a comparison of local government regulations. There are 3 documents covering 26 counties, including Indian River. The source for this was Lee County staff. Lee County is in a moratorium period right now. They've been in a moratorium period for several months, commissioned a $750,000 study. They are, if you look back at that map, in a major mining area. They have large-scale mines and more to come in terms of mapped resource area that they have. So it's a big issue there in Lee County. Their moratorium will last till September of this year. They contacted us to ask us what our regulations were, told us they were putting together this document, and they were kind enough to give it to us. And so we're sharing it with you all. If you look at these 26 different counties and the regulations, I think you'll see that a lot of them have the same common elements as Indian River counties in terms of, regulations on haul routes and mitigating different kinds of nuisances and requiring reclamation and bonds to be posted. But there are also different approaches that you'll see in here. And some of the areas, and this is especially true in the major resource areas, they actually have a special land use designation. They know where the mining resources are and actually have a special designated area, much like you might find in our land use map if there's a special environmental area. Some also require a special zoning district for mining operations, and again, you'll tend to find those in areas where they have the large-scale mining operations. There are also some approaches where they have environmental overlay areas, special, critical protected areas, and they allow mining generally in a lot of areas, but do not allow mining in those particular environmental areas. And then also a lot are like Indian River County with a type of conditional use or a special permit. The Lake Belt case, one of the things that's really driving what activities are going on throughout the state including, I think, market conditions that are driving some of what we're seeing now in our county, is a result of the Lake Belt case. You have 3 resource documents on this, 2 very short articles, and it highlights and excerpts from a 2007 decision. Again, I am not a legal expert. There may be people who, I'm sure there are people who know this case. Actually, it's a kind of an ongoing case better than I, but let me just give you the highlights as I understand them. As you saw on the map earlier, the Miami-Dade Lake Belt area is on the edge of the Everglades, and it's a strategic area. According to DOT engineers and other folks I've talked to, it's the highest quality material in the state. The quantity is exceptional. The depth of that type of rock that they're mining can go anywhere from 50 to, say, 100 feet deep. It's accessible. It's not too far underneath the ground. And the rail connections that are set up to serve that area are you can load directly onto railroad cars, spurs, and it's very efficient. It's so efficient that aggregate from Miami is used in Jacksonville. It's transported that far away, and it's cost effective to use in Jacksonville versus getting it from Georgia. It's that much of an efficient type of operation. So there's a lot of factors that make that the #1 production area in the state. Wetland impacts have been a concern for a number of years there, and beginning sometime in the late 1990s, as I understand it, the mining companies and environmental groups, in particular, what they call stakeholders in the area, started doing kind of a sector plan or a plan of that region to try to address concerns about wetland impacts and other impacts of mining. And I guess some of that group came to a consensus, but some did not. And the Sierra Club brought suit against the Army Corps of Engineers and several mining companies that are listed as defendant interveners. And you'll see that in the backup material who's listed there. There were several challenges, but the primary challenge that Sierra Club brought was the validity of the environmental impact analysis that was the basis for issuing permits issued by the Army Corps. And I think as I understand it, as the case moved on and more environmental information was gathered, the issue of groundwater impacts emerged, besides just impacts on wetlands. And in fact, that becomes, I think, the primary issue in the court decision that you have copies of. There are 2 decisions, but what I have in the packet for you is a 2007 decision. There's a decision in 2006, and essentially that was that there needed to be more environmental study of the matter. And then in 2007, the decision that you have in your packet. And essentially the decision in a nutshell found that the Army Corps erred, and a couple of things immediately came from the decision. One was immediately shutting down mining activity in the Lake Belt area of a limited area near public well fields that served Miami-Dade. And kind of the second action was that a decision that the permits that the Army Corps issued for all these different mining operations needed to be set aside, but setting them aside was stayed until a supplemental environmental impact statement is completed. I don't know the status of that at this point in time, but essentially since this 2006 decision, there have been concerns, and especially with the 2007 decision, that Lake Belt mining is in jeopardy. That's certainly the concern, that it'll be partially or could even conceivably be completely shut down. And the impacts of that, being the #1 region, are aggregate price increases and possible shortages. DOT and the state have been reacting since 2006 to that. The state, through the DOT, commissioned an aggregate study. You have excerpts of that. That's where that map came from that I showed you just a few minutes ago. They established the aggregate task force, which is meeting, having its 4th meeting next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And by Thursday, they will issue a report to the governor and the legislature for them to consider at the upcoming legislative session, which begins in March, ends in May. The state also passed legislation in 2007 that limits moratoriums on mining to 12 months. You may remember that during the discussion on a moratorium for this county. Also required FDOT input on moratorium decisions and impacts of local moratoria. And also recognized, aggregates as a critical resource, and as such, authorize expedited permitting for any state permits for a mining operation. We have also in your backup packet 7 resource documents. The study that I've been referencing on aggregates that was issued in March of 2007, the statute that was passed in 2007, and then the rest of the documents are related to the task force, that aggregate task force, Strategic Aggregates Resource Task Force. I've attended one of the meetings, the first meeting they had in Tampa in December, one day of their meeting. It was very enlightening, and the highlights or summary from my notes is also one of the resources in the packet. We will be updating you all on what comes out of that task force, and I think the important thing to keep in mind about the task force is just a task force, but it will make a report, and the report could be the basis for legislation that could occur in the session coming up. So we will update you all as it comes forward. Also, it's the task force has been gathering a lot of information itself, so there's a lot of information available through the task force. There's some recommendations that they could come up with. It seems, as far as I can discern, that more thorough and better mapping of aggregate resources in the state is a likely outcome or a likely recommendation they would make. They may also designate resource areas as strategic. Once mapped, actually say this is a critical resource, and then they could recommend that local governments' comprehensive plans address that critical resource in their jurisdiction and protect it with comp plan policies. There's also been discussion at the meetings of whether or not, and this is kind of the real key issue for local governments, of course, and why Florida Association of Counties is very involved in the task force meetings, and that's the possibility of preempting local government regulation. It could be broad, it could be narrow, it might not happen at all. It's really hard to say. It could just apply to strategic resource areas. If you look at that map again of the study that they had commissioned for this task force to look at, you know, Indian River County is not on the radar screen at this point in time as a critical resource area. So they may focus mostly on those areas. But they also might look at different aspects of mining operations, such as environmental issues, since that's what has driven a lot of the controversy of mining operations, at least at a state level. So it's possible that they may preempt local governments from any environmental regulation regarding aggregate activities. That's a possibility. They may very well have DEP, obviously at the state level, create a type of permit and special regulations just for mining. They don't have them now. They have general permits that apply. So that could come out of it. They may require, you know, local government input to DEP while they're reviewing a permit for an operation. And they also seem to think, as far as I could tell in discussions, that if there are concerns about dust from roads, then the state should help pave haul roads, and that would take care of that issue and maybe make the transportation of aggregates more efficient. I'm just throwing out, these are ideas that they seem to have come up with. And so again, we're going to be looking at that, and I just, you know, the process could take a while in terms of getting the report from them. Obviously, that should happen next week, but the legislative session runs from March through May, and we'll have to see what kind of legislation might come out. The end result for the Planning and Zoning Commission is to formulate regulations, and so I just put up here the kind of the 4 questions to be asking, and that even includes your response and whatever discussion we have tonight on the background information. What are the problems? What are the solutions? What are the opportunities? And what regulation changes are needed? And staff anticipates that at the end of these meetings or these sessions that we actually recap and see if we can at least compile a list, you know, at the end of each workshop of what things are the most impressive. What do you come away with? Because eventually, what we'll be doing is compiling results or ideas from the workshops and formulating regulations. So we want to keep that in mind, you know, as we go through the process. That's the way I wanted to just recap what we had for for the background information that you have so far, whoops. Okay.
I knew we could do
Yeah.
that. We can get the game.
It's hard to compete with Raymond, I have to admit.
I didn't see that episode.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Hope you have it taped.
Not a problem.
Actually, he started out as a planner, as I understand it. But, again, I open it up to questions that you all may have about any of the background information you've been able to look at. You can certainly come back and bring it up, or you can call me, you can email me with whatever that you run across. When we get through, I just want to give you an opportunity now to ask questions about the background information. In a few minutes, we'll ask Tom Lockwood to come, and I'll introduce him in a minute, but I wanted to give you guys an opportunity now. I've been talking a lot for a while. See if you guys have any questions on the background information that I went over.
That would, if you have questions, that would be fine. Just a reminder to all of us, too, this is not really, this is to kind of get our feet wet. This is not to get deeply into the discussion. It was just to show us what's available. It does have Tom Lockwood who was going to make a presentation just so that, I don't know how many of you all have been in a sand mine and understand the digging and this pumping and the lateral transfers of water and how it goes. It was kind of really just education for us to get started before we go into the workshops. And at some point we need to schedule, I guess that's going to be at the end.
That's correct. I have a schedule I'd like to go over with you all.
Pull together some dates. Correct.
One of the things you might want to put on your radar site is, as the state considers water a state resource, my information is they're also going to declare rock as a state resource.
Well, that's that new law is.
Legislation that's coming down, so it's twofold. It's pretty interesting. The people I've spoken to so far, the state is really going to jump on us.
I was wondering if I could just say a few things. What is the typical workshop going to be like? Can you just sort of give us a...
Right, just staff's ideas at this point. I mean, there are several decisions to make, and I think we can do that when I look at the schedule. But they may be at night, they may be during the day. You may want to do a mix of those so you get people. But we think the best way to handle it is by topic, because we'll need to bring in and invite some experts to come in on different topics. So, I could see them lasting for 3 or 4 hours. I could see you'll be getting background material, but also be hearing from experts and certainly the public as well. And but it'll be work. And I'm hoping for a recap, at the end, maybe anything that's a consensus of an approach to a regulation, or anything that you hear that you think needs to be in our regulations, as we go through it. But I see this as taking a while, but we can only address it, I think, logically if we take it one topic.
If you all had a chance and you thumbed through this, there was a human dimensions of mining in Florida. There's a section in the Lample and Herbert report. It's page 33. It's a summary. They looked at the aggregates, the mining, but they have a whole summary on the dimension of humans and the complaints, and they sum it up probably in I guess it's 2 or 3 pages, about as well as anybody, about what we are hearing, facing, and are going to have to deal with. So they have 4 groups. So that's a good basis to move to at some point too.
And let me just say one thing that we're hoping to do is at least expose you all and the public to, I think obviously the type of things you all hear is a specific project and concerns from residents and so forth. And some of the background material, of course, goes into the economics in the market. Why do we need fill? Why do we need aggregates? And those impacts have to be taken into consideration too, which is why the state is reacting as strongly as they are.
One thing I guess when I scanned through this, I didn't pick up on. Do you know I know Sarasota had the open use mining district, so they kind of created districts, which means I guess I couldn't tell, had they surveyed their property in their county? And if they did, is there technology that could be done other than borings? Maybe Tom will address that later. And then the last is, do they rank mines by size, or type of material? I mean, we're dealing in aggregates, which is rocks, breaking, blasting, versus sand, which is digging 12 feet, 10 feet, for lakes around subdivisions. In looking at these regulations
The state 300.
I don't remember seeing any of the counties that picked up and maybe had an A, B, C, or, different types of impacts.
Yeah, that's that's a good question, because the type of material you're bringing out is some of the aspects of the operation are going to be different. I mean, probably the most obvious one is blasting. Whether you have the type of rock formations that people would want to mine that would be valuable, that would require that. My understanding is at this point we don't have anything like that in Indian River, this far north on the East Coast in Indian River.
Well, I understand the same thing, but I wasn't, whether we do or not, I just wondered if there, because it maybe level of intensity is something we'll end up looking at in the workshop as well. So, okay.
I thought your summary was done pretty well, except it was a little bit lighter on the environmental issues, and I guess we don't know all but that's the major reason the court case was brought against in Miami, I think, was for the environmental reasons.
Right. It's interesting, and actually when I spent the most time putting this packet together was going through the court decision, which is 178 pages. I didn't give you all of that. That actually had the best explanations of some of the environmental issues in it. I looked for what I'd call, pro-environmental groups doing articles. I mean, believe me, there were a lot of articles from the mining side after this decision came down. It was easy to pick one out from there. I searched a couple of different days for articles. I didn't see any from environmental groups, and I just have that one small one in there from the Corkscrew Road community in Lee County. I couldn't find any, but I figured that the case itself, the judge's case, kind of laid out, I thought, the environment for the lake belt anyway. But yeah, there's other information out there, and quite a bit of it. And I think a lot of that will come out, especially related to environmental. We're looking at one entire workshop just on environmental issues, and
I think you're going to have to. If you look at the paragraph that they summarize here, they talk about watching potential damage to domestic municipal water supplies, fish, wildlife habitat, wetlands, historic archaeology, resources, air quality. I mean, just in that paragraph, they've summed up a huge amount of what your concern is. And so we just need to deal with each item.
Mm-hmm. Did your map that you showed reflect just the known resources that are currently being mined, that are active, or is that a geological survey of known resources?
Right, that map focused on what they called lime rock type of aggregates, which is going to be anything from coquina to actually hard rock. It wouldn't reflect, for instance, the different types of sand mine operations that we have in Indian River County. I think at this point that particular map was for what's the most difficult resource, or I guess the scarcest resource.
Concentrated on rock.
Rock.
I mean, they're not
Correct.
sand. They're not. I don't think.
Well, the state codes that I gave our attorney call limestone and sand fall in the same mining. They don't differentiate between sand and limestone.
And you're right. That's exactly one of many of the issues that's getting discussed a lot at the task force. Is are we concentrating on the rock into this, or is there some kind of large loophole for any preemption that would be anything that you take out of the ground? And that's been discussed quite a bit. The devil will be in the details when it all is said and done.
If there are no more questions, can we get? Okay, go ahead. Get Tom up. Turn your mic on, Greg.
No, you're not.
Doesn't sound like it. There's the green light. You may go now.
Green, and I thought it was okay. Stan, I won't go into this very deeply because I don't think it's important right now. And obviously, you have a series of workshops that are going to explain all of the issues associated with it. But the lake belt issue seems to be relatively isolated to me compared to anything that's associated with Indian River County because of the issue of it being close to a Miami water well supply.
And the sheer size.
And the size of it.
Right.
And the interesting thing I thought that I found out about it is that the issue of the environmental pollutants or the carcinogens associated with that site, they didn't find out or track or trace or be able to really find out where that came from. So there is a possibility it could have been from the process of blasting, which I had no idea that could occur because I didn't know benzene could be anything other than a ring as a result of explosives. But that, I guess, will then lend some credibility to that final finding by that environmental impact statement when it comes out.
Right, and I would agree with you that lake belt mining is completely different and is different geologic formations and such than what we have in Indian River County, but it is driving so much of what's going on. I wanted you all to see the background, and it's actually it's been going on since the late 90s in terms of the conflict.
Okay, anybody else?
Actually, I'd like to have one of the questions answered that you asked. What is the technology to determine the depth of the coquina deposit other than actual borings? Do you have that? Do you have that information now?
I thought we might ask Tom when he comes up, but maybe he knows. Anybody else? If not, maybe we can get Master Lockwood up here and
One last question, George.
tell us how to make a mine anyway.
And it's your question again, and maybe I didn't understand, Stan, but is there a detailed map of Indian River County that shows us where the specific aggregates are?
None that I'm aware of. I mean, we have the soil maps that only go so far down. I think you just know on a kind of a site-by-site basis. I would think probably the best information mining companies have, would be my guess.
Tom, have you ever seen a map like that in the county?
Well, up until recently, we didn't even know we had any rock in Indian River County, so this is all new to us.
Yeah.
See, how do we know we have rock in the county?
Just because of the borings and this.
Through exploration.
Is that data available
I'm sure it is.
publicly?
Mhm.
Stan, Tom is here mainly as a party that's been digging and making mines in Indian River County for a long time. We haven't seen him in front of us for forever, and he's kind of in that regard neutral at the sense that he's really had volunteered to kind of lay out to the group what mining is about, how to go through it, and maybe answer questions for us that would be operational that we may gain some knowledge for to carry into these workshops. So,
Well, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, certainly it's my pleasure to be here, and I'm here to be of help and have some limited knowledge. When I first started mining, it was pretty simple. You just went out and dug a hole. And obviously, we've come a long way since that period of time. In the early 70s, Richard Graves and myself started a company because we felt there was a significant need for someone or some entity to provide fill service for contractors and developers, although there were very few developers back then, and individual homeowners. And we owned a piece of property on the corner of 510 and US 1, and it went west to 58th. And it was on the ridge, which at that point in time really didn't mean a great deal to us, other than it had this wonderful material called yellow sand. Subsequently, we learned that was the primary recharge for the shallow aquifer for not only Indian River County, but St. Lucie County. And we mined that area for approximately 10 years. But in those days, the way that one mined was pretty simple. There were some significant elevations there, probably in excess of 40 feet. So all you did was use a loader and put that material in a dump truck, and off you went. And it was a relatively simple process. Today, as you probably have seen through the applications that have come before you, we mostly do wet mining, which requires digging below the water surface and using a dredge to extract the material, which is a far more complicated, far more costly procedure. And we learned as we went along the importance of the ridge, and there was ordinances that were passed that limited the excavation to approximately 24 feet. And Dr. Becker, you may remember that Maggie Bowman and Ruth Sandbridge were on a committee that was very instrumental in putting some teeth in the mining ordinances that we didn't have, that I think certainly have been beneficial for us today. One of the most significant things in the early days of mining was trying to obtain a PSC permit, which gave you the territory in which you could operate. And that was far more stringent than any ordinance requirements as far as obtaining a mining permit. Subsequently, as you probably know, that the requirements changed and site plans were required, and that you had to show how you were going to provide a reclamation plan. And the thing that I think you need to keep in mind when you think of mining, that it really is just the initial part of a development of a piece of property. All of us now know how expensive land costs are, and that the mining is just the beginning, and the rest of it should follow some type of development. And that you can look at some of the things that we've been involved in. For example, the property in Wabasso ended up being one of the finest golf courses in the state of Florida, which is now Red Stick. We did a project that Mr. Keating lives in out at Bent Pine, which was a primary recharge lake of approximately 20 acres, but its end use was residential, and I think you'll find that was a nice addition to his community. We've done projects south, like on John Tripson's site that now has a major development, which I think is Millstone, if I'm not, am I correct, Stan, on that? And I will say, with a certain amount of pride, we have had very few issues with the county. You know, there are ordinances in place, we followed the rules, and we've tried to be considerate of that. And I think that there are others that have followed suit. We've had a close alliance with the Fishers in Sebastian, and I think you'll find that they have operated correctly for the most part, and those facilities have turned into nice amenities for residential development. And you have a new issue before you, which is rock mining. We've not had that before, but I'm sure with your wisdom and the input that will come from those people that are in that business, that collectively you will come up with an acceptable ordinance that everybody can work within. So very briefly, that's kind of the brief scenario. I'm certainly willing to try to answer any questions that you might have.
Can you explain, maybe from our edification or mine anyway, with wet mining, with kind of the procedure, because when you pump down, the water has to go somewhere. I thought it had to stay on site, or to kind of recycle if possible on site. Do they have to run 24 hours a day? Operationally, how does it operate? What has to happen?
Well, there's two ways to do that, George, depending on the size. Some can be retained on site, but generally it is discharged off site. And yes, it does require 24 hours a day, because to keep the water level down, the pumps that the agencies allow you to use require that it be a 24-day operation.
I mean, inside in a residential area, I guess the concern is as we move in and as residences get closer, because in the mines you're talking about, we were digging lakes and houses were going in around them. So, I mean, are we dealing with a different type of mining operation than what we would do?
Well, I think the noise is a factor, but I think that's an issue that can be controlled. I mean, we do a lot of dewatering in existing communities, and there are provisions available to contractors to minimize the noise. And obviously that is an important factor. It's just like the dust issue. The dust issue shouldn't be an issue, because if it's done correctly and maintained, it should not be an issue. So you have an enforcement thing that needs to be looked at.
Tom, you mentioned the depth of 24 feet. What is the local depth now for the sand mines? They go a lot deeper than 20.
Well, we were 24 feet above sea level. Now it could be as much as 50 feet.
Stan, is that the local? Is there a control on the depth for sand slash?
You might want to get your mic down there.
Is there a standard for, or a limit on the sand slash coquina slash whatever mining?
Not at the local level, as Tom referred to. On the Atlantic Coastal Ridge, we have you cannot mine below elevation 25, but that's in a particular geographic area. Outside of that, when someone is proposing a lake or a mining pit to dig locally, we don't have. We have regulations on slopes, but essentially it's going to be St. John's River Water Management District. And the actual slopes that they can do in that particular size pit that's probably going to going to give you your any limitations on the
For
depth.
some reason, I thought we had a 30-foot depth limit.
I did too. That's what I thought was.
There is no depth. That's just coincidental. People were going down about 30 feet.
Well, the other agencies, it becomes a far more complicated procedure in order to get permitted. And you'll begin to learn this as you go through this process with the hydrology studies and the environmental impacts and the reclamation and all of that stuff. So the deeper you go, the more difficult it is.
Explain to us, Tom, the quality of rock / limestone coquina that's required for Department of Transportation. There's a grading system, right? Mm-hmm. Would you explain that to us?
Actually, I got Chuck. Are you here?
Because a lot of people, I just recently found out that there was actually a grading system.
Take that mic.
And not all coquina is equal.
Well, Chuck can probably give you a little better indication than I can of that.
Basically, the state will
We need a
have
name and address,
guidelines.
Chuck. Just introduce yourself.
Chuck, what's your name?
Chuck Kramer.
Right, thank you.
Basically, the state will have guidelines based on the weight, the hardness, and the density of the material in relation to other materials. In other words, the quality of a specific material to hold up under a specific use.
When you say weight, you mean weight by cubic foot or cubic yard, or is that,
Yeah,
is
most
that
of
what
your
you're doing?
rock is done by cubic foot.
And is there a requirement for like clay content?
Oh yeah, it's very carbonate content.
I'm sorry, I'm probably preempting what you're going to say. I'm just.
No, you're correct. Basically, the state wants the purest form and to a hardness specification that will last in the application. And it's the same thing with limestone. Limestone in the big part of Florida is instrumental in concrete. In order to make the concrete specification, you have to have a rock with a compressive strength that will maintain that specification. And the Lake Belt rock just happens to be the best rock in the state, for that purpose, and that's why it's such a hot spot. Coquina, on the other hand, is for the most part road base, and the rock that you have here in Indian River County, much like northern St. Lucie County, is primarily road base. And the DOT spec, which most of the county agencies adhere to, specifies what the specific composition of that rock would be for that given application. And you don't know, you can dig in an area and have it and go a quarter of a mile and still have rock, but not have the quality that it takes to make that specification. So it's a tough business. You may sit on a gold mine and you may sit on nothing.
Is there a degree? What's the different degrees in the mining? I envision the sand mines I've seen is where they dewater. They have a pump. The pump's running. The water's going out. They have actually a big backhoe or a big dredge and just digging out the dry area and loading it on dump trucks. And then, when they fill up with water, you get into the dredges, and you see those along the I-95 or whatever down south. But I've never really seen what I consider wet, where you have a dredge in the lake.
A real dredge, yeah.
Up here now, you may have done that, but
we have a number of them right here.
I just hadn't noticed them, I guess. But
I think
rock is different. I mean, rock. We talk about blasting, but aren't there different degrees of how you break up rock? I mean, so you could have.
Coquina, for the most part, can be excavated. You can dewater.
You could take a track hoe and dig it.
You can dig it. And, I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, or even 20 years ago, that may not have been the case. But now you have equipment that has a heavy enough ground weight and the hydraulic breakout force that you can excavate coquina. I'll be honest with you, it's not that much different than sand mining.
Well, that was my point. We have on one side we have a feeling of a nightmare that we've got to do all this stuff because it's rock and that changes your perception. But what you're really doing is coquina would be dug just like sand.
Just like sand or more like general fill even. The reason I say the difference between sand and general fill, you would tend to dewater, excavate to an elevation where it would be financially feasible. You can only move X amount of water. And then, of course, you would allow the hole to fill up and it becomes a residential lake. Now, if you're looking to make sand or a specific use sand, most of the time after you would do your dry excavation to about 25 foot below ground surface, then you'll switch over to hydraulic dredging. And there's two reasons. A, you're not trying to control the superficial aquifer, you're not trying to dewater. And B, you can go the additional depth and get a better quality product. So, it serves two purposes. We tend to do that. We excavate to about 25 feet below ground surface.
Let the lake fill up?
Let the lake fill up, then you put a hydraulic dredge in. The dewatering issue becomes a non-issue. The hydrostatic pressure issue becomes a non-issue, and you dredge to 50, 60 feet. That seems to be the prevalent depth nowadays. St. John's will allow you 50, 60 feet. Coquina mining really isn't that much difference. You have to have a crusher and impactor. But as far as to excavate the material, it's really no different than excavating general fill.
Educate me about, you said South Florida Water Management or St. John's, they give you the permit? Is that a permit you have to go through them first, Tom? I mean, is that, so you get a state permit first, a St. John's permit or a water management permit, then you get a local permit? Is it?
The two agencies.
Walk me through that step.
The two agencies will have some overlap. When you approach them with a permitting process and you want to do depths to, say, 50 or 60 feet below ground surface, the whole process becomes much more complicated because the criteria for the St. John's, they want to know what the subsurface conditions are. They want to know what the strata is. They want to have an idea of the groundwater tables. And you basically have to compile a package to demonstrate to them that you are doing a sectional view of what that excavation would look like, what the ground strata would be, what the existing water level is, and they'll review that. And then they'll come up with a monitoring system, and you'll do it weekly, you'll do it monthly, you'll do it whatever they want to do, and they'll come up with a system to offset any off-site impact.
So their major concern is with not interrupting the flow of the water down the system.
Whenever you're pumping a well, there's a cone, so I assume there's a cone effect, a drawdown, just a bigger area.
Here's the thing, and I think that, and I was here at a county commission meeting and watched a presentation, I think it was on Backus's theory about lakes and excavations. And what everybody has to remember here in Indian River County and St. Lucie County, when you talk about excavating 50, 60, even 90 or 95 feet, between the superficial aquifer and the upper strata, there's an aquiclude. It's a layer of clay. And in the northern part of Indian River County would be the Tamiami clay layer, and in the southern part it's the Hawthorne. And that layer can go anywhere from 100 to 700 feet thick. And it sits over top of the Floridan aquifer. And about the only thing that perforates that layer are wells.
Yeah.
You've never perforated excavating a lake. You wouldn't perforate it dredging that lake. However, there's hundreds of wells. And they have perforated that layer all over the state, not just here. So when you look at the dewatering thing, and I don't want anybody to have any misconceptions, it's not as bad a thing as you would think. As a matter of fact, now I just permitted a facility where I have to have a series of recharge dikes around the facility.
Right.
I dewater from my excavation. I pump the water into the holding cells. I maintain it at a level 6 feet above the ground. The bottom of the holding cell is 6 feet below the ground to recharge the perimeter.
For the hydrostatic pressure to recharge the perimeter.
It pulls my cone of depression in on the property.
Okay.
And there's no intrusion of salt water or anything of that type?
No. For a lot of years there was a big concern about saltwater intrusion, and particularly with mines that were at the Sand Ridge and wanted to go below 25. And of course the St. John's, at that time they pushed everybody towards dredging because you maintain the hydrostatic pressure. As you know, there's a weight difference between saltwater and freshwater.
Right.
And there hasn't been too much problem in this county. And on the wells, on the mines that are west of the Sand Ridge, I doubt there would be a problem.
What's the
Your
supply,
dewatering
Tom?
depths just aren't that deep. At 25 feet, your dewatering depth's not that deep.
What's the, everybody's worried about the state's going to run out of rock. How much of the rock are for roadbed, et cetera, comes from the state of Florida as opposed to from Georgia or other locations? Did we get all of our rock from Florida, mostly?
I would assume that most of the material is derived from the state of Florida. Perhaps when you get up near Georgia, there may be some, but
some down from
most of it comes right here within our own state. And it's a factor of supply and demand.
Sure. Whatever's closest is the cheapest.
You know,
Right.
and the same is true with sand in this county. I mean, it's a market-driven item, and right now we don't have enough supply to meet the demand, particularly in the rock issue.
Is there
Georgia-
some
Georgia's probably
barged
pretty
in
happy
from
about
the Bahamas or anything?
Well, then you got, that's just not economically feasible.
The state task force also is looking at that issue. In fact, where they have their meeting in Tampa and Jacksonville, they look at the ports there. And you're right, one of the questions is, well, if we run out of material in Florida, how much can we import? And even with improvements slated for the port of Tampa, and some of this is new backup material, it was less than 10% of what the state would use on a yearly basis that they could actually handle.
It's economics, no question about
So
it.
exporting, or importing could fill a small percentage, but it looks like it couldn't come close.
There's a small, I've seen it
To
over
the-
there, there's a small small mountain fort over there. Do we get any coquina/sand for fill from the Bahamas or anywhere like that?
Well, there's a little that comes in at Fort Pierce, but it's minuscule.
Minuscule.
None's coming into Cape Canaveral?
There may be some there, I don't know.
There's some now.
Wasn't Raker using it from there?
Yeah. I think since they closed down in Fort Lauderdale or Miami, I've seen barges coming into, there's been a regular route on the court. I think there's stuff headed in there now.
Yeah.
Chuck, one of the things that also has confused me on mines and we see this when someone permits a mine, they also talk in terms of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3.
Right.
And in some mines, they start like in one area, we've got a 5 or 10 acre area, and then we're going to mine this down. They want to move over to another 10 acre area, and then so forth. In doing that, and I may have this timing all wrong, because it's confusing to me, but we see phase 1, well, they can only finish, they've got to start phase 2 about halfway down on phase 1, so they can't finish phase 1 and do the literal and the restoration before they get to phase 2, and there's kind of a seesaw or a leapfrog, and why is that, and what's that, why is that?
Well, I think what happens when you go into the larger excavations, and I think the county has a limitation on phasing, it's what, 20 acres?
Okay.
So what'll happen is, when you're excavating 20 acres, and it's going to be a continuation to, say, excavate a 60 or 80 acre lake.
Right.
It would be hard to do, as you know, it would be hard to do a total reclamation. One of the good things about the county's regulation, and I don't have any problem with the 20 acres, it's easier to control the water in a 20-acre parcel that's excavated than it is to try to open up 100 acres and control that water. I think you have to be allowed, I think the county allows 2 phases to be operable at one time, and I think you have to have that situation in order to be able to start to progress to the second phase and keep the operation operating as you start to do the reclamation phase behind you.
So, you have we do a 20-acre pocket, say, and then we leave it could an area. It looks like almost like it's not a dike, but it's a
cofferdam. It's a dike,
right.
Yeah.
And you just skip over 30 feet, and then you start in the next 20. And as you are eventually, is the purpose eventually just to control? Is it controlling the water? Then is that to hold you to 20 acres where you can control things?
I think it's twofold. I think that water control is one of the things. I think it's much easier to control the excavation size and the dewatering. And I think the second reason is that, for the most part, volumetrically, I think that 20 acres is a good number because it allows you to have a fairly large-scale operation and allows you to go into the next phasing without disrupting that operation. The county's regulations, believe it or not, they're very good. And
Do you eventually connect the two? Do you eventually connect the two?
Yeah, eventually do. You take the cofferdam out. In our case, we dredge it out. If we make the transition to the next phase, we dredge the cofferdam out, and it becomes one continuous lake. It may be 40 acres.
Depends on what you want it to look like in the end.
Where did you guys get the 20 acres? Is that just what's an economically viable prototype? that's what you, I mean, 5 acres would be too small to make.
Yeah, I really don't know it's been in there since before I was here. The 20-acre part of it may have been economic viability for it. I really don't know. It's the size operations in this county are a lot different than the major resource areas, so it seemed to fit. And if it looks really smart now, then all the better.
It works out, believe it or not, it does. It works out quite well. The 20-acre regulation the county has and the 2-phase regulation the county has works very well. And I think,
you need to get to write that down. That's somebody telling you did something right. Obviously, somebody else did.
Somebody else did it right.
Bob was not on that committee, so you don't have to worry about that.
You have other regulations that we've worked under, and for the most part, they're good regulations. Enforcement's the issue. I mean,
is there an issue? One of the other things was we start the digging and then had to do with the height of the dirt piles. I remember we often have limited that.
Yeah, matter of fact, I agreed to some restrictions on our last mine.
Right.
With that, and for the most part, that's not a problem. I mean, you have to be reasonable. Everybody has to be reasonable.
Tom, what is your main, when you have a mine going, what is your main complaint from the neighbors? Noise or traffic, or is that the main two?
Well, that has been recently the issue that has come before the county commission. Again, as I said to you earlier, that if you comply with the rules and regulations, it is not an issue. We don't, and we have not experienced those kinds of problems. We unfortunately have had a situation that people have kind of ignored some of the rules and regulations, and people kind of overlooked it and hoping it was going to go away. But now, unfortunately, it got out of hand. So those kinds of things can be controlled.
I think one of the good things that will come out of all of this, and I'm not being critical of the county because I know personnel has a lot to do, and the number of people have a lot to do with causing compliance by people, and people that are making money many times will stretch the number of trucks and the speed of the trucks or whatever if no one is causing them not to do that. And I think the interesting thing that's come about now because of the Lake Belt issue, which is really what's brought this all about, and also 82nd Avenue, is that if compliance had occurred in Indian River County to large part, and this is going to come down, I think, more to noise abatement, the number of trucks, how much dust is created, and those types of issues, as opposed to environmental issues. I don't think the environmental issues are going to be that big of a result in Indian River County when we come to conclusion.
Hang on, Richard. It's all right. Just keep your seat.
I think you've got a real expert here in Chuck, and just give Chuck the opportunity to probably get more. But certainly the technology and methodologies and the efficiency of taking sand and coquina and things like that has really improved the technology has really made a big difference in the last 10 years.
So the equipment,
I mean, I think I've asked you this before, but the mine up on Power Line Road, in that where it backs in. I mean, it's right up against the neighborhood there, and I think I asked prior to the mine that we did out on 86th or whatever about complaints. I checked with the county and whatnot, and I found that it was remarkable. I think you'd had like 1 or 2 complaints. You all stayed on top of it. Most of the neighbors didn't seem to have a big problem. And that's a fairly big mine. Planning for a subdivision, but I mean, it's backed right up against the neighborhood. So this isn't here to try and accolade mines, pro con. It really is trying to figure out if we, the commissioners, have questions from people right now that they're kind of in a neutral setting to find out about their equipment, about what they see as problems that they face or we may face as time goes on. So I'd like to stick to the mechanics.
You hit the nail on your head for my question. Is we always have a transition zoning in between industrial, commercial / residential. You go industrial to multifamily to whatever. And this is commercial / industrial, and there's absolutely no gradient in between. You can have it just like you said, right up next to a housing development.
I think the difference here, and actually something that I have not come across yet in other local government regulations, is and we put this in the code back in the 90s. a 10-year maximum life of a mining operation. That's in our regulations now. So the mining operation is, in the scheme of things, temporary by nature. As Tom had mentioned, and you've got information on this, I mean, the end game is generally a lake or some other kind of resource, and so it is transition. It is a transition just by virtue of time. And you're correct. Most of the operations that we have been completed here within 10 years, and they're lakes serving residential communities or golf course communities and that sort of thing. So it's transitional due to time.
By default, time's
and
out,
I think
yeah.
from a regulatory standpoint, a lot of these properties that have been mined were zoned agricultural from years past, and as we've said before, in a lot of cases, ag that's inside the urban service area is a holding zone. And so they get their mining permit while they're zoned ag, they do their mining operation within 10 years, and then they rezone it, and it becomes residential. That's how the zoning kind of change occurs over time.
Timing out is what, yeah.
But times changed when we started about rock and impact crushers and stuff, so just, which I'd like to ask you about in just a second. But Donna?
I had a question. Is that 10 years per phase?
No, it's for the, you bring up a good question. What is the mine? Well, it may be a 40-acre tract for this 10 years, and it could be a 40-acre tract next door for the next 10 years. I mean, it depends on ownership and that sort of thing. And that certainly could happen.
So if you have a 400 acres, the mining permit for the first 20 acres is 10 years. You jump over the next 20 acres.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is any project, but at the end of that 10 years, you'd be coming back before you all. I mean, this is given our current regulations now. I mean, you have to go through the entire approval process for a separate project.
Okay.
And the same can be said of subdivisions. I mean, you can have a 100-unit subdivision and do that, and then 10 years later, you come back to the P&Z 10 years later for a different subdivision. So same thing could happen with a sequence of mining projects. It's possible.
I don't think that, I mean, for a long time in this county, a 40-acre mine, one or two 40-acre mines supplied a lot of product for the building market. I mean, it was only in the boom that all of a sudden we had some more sand mines start, other than building lakes for subdivisions. So explain to me, Chuck, this thing, I was thinking about Indrio Road down there on the old Struzula property where Dickerson's operating now. I mean, that is very different. Mining regulations and the differential here in this county, that's a very different mine than what we all have been talking about. And, how that tailors and, the noise factors, how you would see operation on a mine like that, because, I mean, you've got much bigger factors with noise and equipment, and it's an industrial look, which is, if nothing else, visually scarring the neighborhood or the people around it if they want to develop homes. And that's what I think that the fear is. We're moving into something like that versus what you all have been talking about with sand mines that became residential.
I think even in that situation down there, they're still doing coquina mining. Your county regulation requires buffers, which I notice if you look into that property in St. Lucie County from 95, there isn't too much buffering there. It's pretty visible.
Right.
For the most part, the county requires buffering, and the buffering is pretty effective. I think if you came up 66th Avenue to 77th and you look to your right, tell me what's there.
Yeah,
you can't see it. We've had two mines backed up to residential. One mine I dredged, and I also had a mulching facility in that same mine backed up against residential. And you wouldn't know.
But I mean, mostly you're backing a dump truck up with a back and loading that dump truck, right? I mean, you don't have the conveyors. You're not loading.
Well, at one time we had a wash plant, a mulcher, and I think you're buffering for the most part. I think you can really take care of the noise issue and the visual effect if your buffering's, satisfactory. And I think the county regulation with that's also very good, and I think for the most part, like I say, at 66th and 77th, I think you can see it works. I have a dredge that runs in there. I don't even think anybody knows it's even there. Impactor, cross here probably about had the same effect. I think that in the overall, with the proper berms and the buffering, I don't think you would really know it's there. The advantage of being out in ag, I mean, now you're starting to see residential or large residential lots adjacent to ag, and you know, it's inevitable. But I still think with the buffering and still having enough setbacks, which the county has a setback regulation, I still think it's possible to work in that parameter. I think you can work in that, and I think you can keep the noise relatively low. I think that we do it. I mean, we work up against residential. I know it can be done. It can be done. And the dust issue should be a non-issue. Like Tom said, it should be a non-issue.
Does the dredge run 24 hours, or is it got
They run 10 hours a day, 8 to 10 hours.
The only thing dewatering and running pumps that's the only real necessary 24-hour a day part of the operation.
Well, with dredging, George, there's no pump running 24 hours.
No, I know. I'm just thinking, but from an operational standpoint, is there anything that couldn't be restricted if we wanted it to be?
Well, I will say this.
Other than that pump.
The technology in pumps in the last 10 years is really unbelievable. They have what they call whisper quiet pumps now, and from my distance to that wall, 25, 30 feet away, it's barely audible. And I didn't believe it myself. I'm in the mining business, and I said, there's no possible way.
They've got one on Presley's, and I've been out there.
It's
very quiet.
I put one to dewater a footer for a subdivision over on A1A next to a condo, and I never heard a word. Those people weren't upset about it at all.
But I mean, I'm just thinking, looking down the road when we're looking at regulations in operation, and you all are operators, is the motors. I mean, the running a pump is really the only thing that's necessary. Kind of 24 hours a day. So I mean, even in the past, we didn't always put hours on people. But I mean, we're starting, as we got into certain areas, we started limiting them 7 to 5 or 8, whatever. But I mean, there's nothing. It's other than being inconvenience, less, productivity,
right,
et cetera. I mean, there's nothing that really can't be regulated if we wanted to that would affect you in a really harmful way, other than that pump.
Yeah, the dewatering is the toughest. It's the toughest part of the operation anyway. It is.
Are these pumps supervised or controlled 24 hours a day with personnel or anything? Or they?
No.
During the working day, of course, people are there. In the afternoons, they're serviced because they're going to run through the evening. They have an automatic shutdown device on them. If they leak hydraulic oil, they'll shut off. If they leak fuel, they'll shut off. If they overheat, they'll shut off. We have a pretty good track record. I think the last one that I ever had to do anything with had about 36,000 hours on it. And they're pretty self-sufficient. They're self-contained.
We leave them overnight.
And you usually idle them down during the night because you don't have to have quite as much production.
Yeah. And
Tom,
usually, I'll tell you what, once you get past the initial surficial aquifer and you start the cone, and the cone goes out to its effect line, you may not have to pump 24 hours. That's a given in the beginning, but as time goes on, there are times you won't have to pump.
So maintaining the drawdown doesn't take as much as getting it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something, you're kind of graced here with a medium defined sand, and the strata layers are fairly well compacted. They're sedimentary deposit, and it doesn't give up the water easily, so your cone of depression is usually tight and it's narrow.
You guys need to get his name and address because he needs to come back. Do you know of anything in the county that's hard rock? Do we have any hard rock in the county that would require blasting or anything like that you know of?
I don't think so. Are you, Chuck?
Chuck?
You don't have it here.
Not here?
That strata's not here.
That's a good answer.
I really don't understand the part, though, that you don't have to read the dredging at the end or the pumping out. Why does it get less? I didn't understand that part in the coning.
Establishing the cone drawdown.
Why you don't have to do the pump? Why do you have less pumping?
What happens is you're basically, when you pull down a cone of depression and you overcome what is the hydraulic head of the water that's coming to the excavation, you create the void that the water wants to come to. You'll meet a point where you start to overcome that. And what will happen is you'll have a period of time maybe during the day, and I'm not saying this in all mines, it depends on what the strata is that you're dewatering. You'll have a period where you'll overcome that, and if you were to shut the pump off for 6 to 8 hours, the accumulation of water would be minimal. Minimal being, say, a foot or 6 inches of water.
You can stay on top of it. Yeah.
Right, well, if you have that advantage, which doesn't happen very often, but if you do, of course, it's more economically feasible to shut the pump off. So, and that's what you would do. And like I say, you have a lot of situations here where your cone of depression is very tight because the soil is very tight. The sand is not large sand, it doesn't give up its water easily. So when you pull that cone of depression down and you tighten the cone up, many times, like Tom had said, you can back the pump down at nighttime really to a very low level to maintain that cone of depression. And as far as cones going off-site, the way the St. John's permits everything now with recharge trenches on the perimeters, usually the cone is well inside the property line because when you stack that hydraulic pressure up on the perimeter, it tends to recharge the superficial aquifer.
So you're saying the cone of depression will be maintained inside of the 20-acre mine site?
Oh, yeah, usually far inside. They make you put monitoring wells in. I just did a system last week down there. They make you put the monitoring wells in. Now you're monitoring them on a weekly basis now to see if you have a drawdown effect off the site. And I've been doing this most of my life, and I've yet to have a drawdown problem off the site.
Are there specifications for these pumps as far as decibel readings that we could incorporate in our regulations? In other words, at 20 feet, we have a 20 decibel reading.
Manufacturer give them to you, yeah.
Manufacturer's specifications that we could use.
Supply you with that, particularly on the whisper pumps. They'll supply you with that information.
Do you have any idea what they are offhand?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Because I would think we would want to set a decibel reading at a certain distance. What might be one of our conditions? Yeah.
The current code is what, 15 minutes at 55 or something. We have a code level that's fairly.
Yeah. Well, I think we have an L. Yeah, we have 3 different time periods.
I remember an air conditioner at St. Edwards that ran into that.
Yeah. That's right. The air conditioning units, wasn't it?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask. Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask, I think, a lot of the on-site, I think aside from blasting, the on-site, and that would be certainly a subject of the regulations possibly. The on-site things, I think it might not be that difficult to codify the best practices is really what I think we're hearing. Most of the complaints, and I notice it's Sawmill Ridge Trucking Company, right? I think that impacts from trucking, from the hauling, has been the major concern lately, certainly off of 82nd Avenue. And so I think besides what's going on site, that actually, aside from the hydrology or environmental issues, which you still have to look at, definitely, aside from that, I think probably some of the main problems that we've had, certainly in the 82nd Avenue, is not as a result of what's gone on site. It's as a result of truck traffic. So I think the real question that while we have the president of a trucking company here, we could ask is, how many trucks does it take? What can you do to control dust coming off of trucks? And it's not just dust from the operations. I think actually most of the complaints I've ever heard is dust coming off of trucks. So right. there's dealing with the site itself, but also dealing with the hauling. And I think a lot of the complaints have been from the hauling aspect as well.
Don't we have regulations requiring watering, though? I mean, for the site we have it, but not for the road.
You're not going to stop a truck. When it's bouncing down a road, it's going to get...
No, but you can water the road. That's what I'm saying.
Well, that's the dirt roads, yeah.
Duh.
I know, I've heard a lot of complaints of the debris falling off the truck, like off the tailgates, off the side of the truck, and the cars following it behind. And the car is getting sandblasted, so to speak, from the fall-off of the truck as it's on the road. I don't know. Maybe we have to clean the trucks before they leave the site after they're loaded. I don't know.
Well, you have those covers, don't you, Tom?
Yeah, that's the top. But, dirt fits in the ridges on the tailgate and on the sides. And as they bounce down the road, that falls off and hits the cars, obviously. It's like sandblasting. That I know was one problem. And the other one is the quality of the truck. The squeaking of the brakes and the downshifting of mufflers creates a lot of noise on the road. Some kind of truck inspection, maybe, better quality.
That's getting into the Department of Transportation.
Right, but I don't know if they...
Which you already have. I mean, trust me, the DOT is here on a regular basis to inspect and ensure that those trucks are safe and sound.
But
The
I've
loading
seen,
of the truck is a factor here. I can tell you from Dr. Fisher's and our own operation, I mean, we've delivered up to 10,000 yards a day to subdivisions without complaints. So we know how to do it. And
How many
done,
truckloads is that, Tom?
I'm sorry?
How many truckloads is that?
10,000 a day?
There's 20,
divided by
Figure it's 20
17.
yards, I mean, that's a lot of trucks. For example,
500 a day.
so in round numbers, probably 500 a day, truckloads,
Yeah.
to one place. We're not talking about going all over the county.
Little Jim Island isn't 4 feet off the river for no reason.
Well, look at Grand Harbor. I mean, there's another.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean,
I think.
Those trees have got sand marks.
I think that when you're a mine operator, and I think Tom will agree with this, particularly the people I work for, the fishers, you have to look at your trucks as part of your mining operation, not as something outside of your mining operation. You know, they're vital to us as a mining operation. They have to be able to get to the job and back from the job, and we've always controlled our trucks. We pay attention to what our trucks do, and we're receptive to the public. I mean, if the public has a complaint, we chase it down right away, whether it's my company trucks or whether it's somebody else. And I think Tom knows that. We stay on top of it. He stays on top of his, and that's why we were able to move 10, 11,000 yards a day and not have the problem. You know?
You own your own trucks?
We have.
Both of you do, don't you?
we do
Fisher
both.
Sons has their own trucks, yeah.
But what percentage of mining companies do own their own trucks as opposed to leasing somebody, the trucks coming in and leasing the sand mine being separate owner from the truck? Is that a normal practice or?
Yes.
So in that case, the mining operator would not have control over the trucks?
We should. I mean, that's part of his
Yeah,
operation.
Exactly. I mean, you still, they're coming to you for material, and you can control
You're
their
paying them on a
conduct and your
contract
haul
load
routes.
basis.
You're controlling the contract.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Well, evidently, we're not on 82nd. So it sounds like an enforcement problem is what you're saying.
The difference is that we control our material, and we control where it goes. You have some other operators that don't. They are suppliers only. And so they just furnish material to a
Any
contractor.
an independent truck could go in and
knows
pick
where
up
it
a
goes
load.
from there.
Go anywhere with it.
Correct.
I think one of the major things
Which
that will
is a
come out of
big
this too is that the compliance is issue. And is Fisher going to supply the water truck that keeps the dust down when he's in operation? Or is there going to be a fee by the county? And the county has its, I know you don't want to do that, but the county has its own water truck, and that makes sure that they're going up and down the road and keeping the dust down. And the same thing would be, I noticed in some of those county regs, they have a fee associated with the permitting process, which is specifically for maintaining the roads while the operation is occurring. So I think a lot of those things may come out of what we all do and the
And there was
resulting-
one that it was so much per cubic foot, or
Right.
it was a load-to-load charge or stuff.
Well,
yeah.
you've got bonding requirements that we have to put up in order to maintain. And to be honest with you, Chuck and I went out and looked at some of the problems with 82nd, and we were absolutely appalled that that was being allowed to take place. We could not get away with that. So, I think it comes back somewhat to an enforcement issue, that you do have the rules and regulations in place, and perhaps with, some teeth in it, that issue could be much better than what it is.
I think the bottom line is there are those of us in this industry that really do take pride in doing what we do. And, I wouldn't know how to do anything else. So I got to live in this industry. And we get a little upset, just like with 82nd Avenue, because I think for a good many years we've lived within the county regulations, haven't had any real problems. And now all of a sudden this has become a hot issue. And I think that the county regulations are good. And I think it is an enforcement issue as far as to say, okay, well, we have a violation. Before it becomes something that makes the public so upset, like the south end of 82nd Avenue, something had to happen before that time, because that has set the pace for everything since, and that's why we're here.
As we progress, I mean, part of what is driving this really is the fact that mining inside the urban service area probably was handled differently than it would be handled west of 95 in a kind of a wide open area. I mean, you're not probably as careful. You didn't have to be. Nobody was there to complain. But as we moved out of the urban service area into these ranchette areas where they're close in and they're turning into slowly but surely residential areas.
Yeah.
I mean, are we the things we're going to be looking at is like the distance from the equipment from with the buffering, the distances off the property lines, and so I mean, I guess you all are saying comfortably you think that the 300 feet, the distances we have are maintainable and or would work if handled properly.
Yeah. I think that your present regulations, there's no reason why you can't maintain your noise level, your dust problem. I think you can live inside those regulations now. One of the arguments that I always say, as far as to stay or try to do the mining situation west of 95, and what's going to happen as time goes on, as you move out into the St. Johns Basin, then the other agencies aren't going to allow it either. West of 95, I think that's going to become a big problem. Anywhere in the St. Johns Basin, the permitting problems would make it very difficult. And that's why I wouldn't want to see exclude mining from the east side of 95 in the service area. I think it's still a viable thing to do. I just think you need to have the regulations or the present regulations, enforce them. And, we've proven you can do that. We've proven you can be near residential and make it work. But you have to want to make it work.
I mean, other than how good they are, have we got any other maybe questions on equipment or anything you all would like to know about Phil and mining?
Yeah, I'm here. I like talking about this stuff. So.
Yeah, right down your alley, right, Chuck?
You and the Fishers are doing good work. You guys are
I think that if we can do this mobile tour, we may end up calling you all or some of you all again.
This is an educational process for us. We're not in the business. That's why we're here right now.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Well, Stan, that's
Next thing I'd like to do, and thank you, gentlemen, is pass out to you a draft schedule and go over that briefly.
You're not going to tell us we're going to have to go to a meeting, are you?
No, we can tell you a single meeting.
Thank you.
I got a single thing.
So did I got to figure out when the dark of the moon is and whether this interferes with bone fishing or not.
I think
Tom, Stan, there's two sides to it, right?
Yes.
Oh, you gave me the read? Okay, I'm sorry.
You're going to put this on the website so it'll be available for the public so they can...
Yes, after I get some direction from you all. But it's a draft, which is why I haven't disseminated it yet. But really, when staff laid this out this week, looking at the different workshops and take into account really what we need to report back to you on whatever the legislature does, it takes quite a bit of time, and we really do believe that we need a mobile workshop followed by 4 different workshops, and we need several weeks in some cases between those workshops, different topics. So that adds up quite a bit. And then there's, of course, is a report back to the Board of County Commissioners and direction from them. And then, assuming that they want new regulations, they can give us some feedback on.
Are you thinking about the workshops dealing with maybe specific criteria? You've indicated one, environmental.
Right, exactly.
It would be a workshop that was all environmentally based.
That's correct.
I keep referring back to this because this summary was pretty good. I mean, they talk about the problems being roadways,
right,
quality of life, property values and damage, and then in the environment. Those are your 4, and they've kind of compacted them. So,
here are the 5 workshops that we're proposing on here. The first one's a mobile workshop. but I actually didn't call that number one. That's just mobile workshop. And then 4 public workshops where you're going to have, perhaps in the chambers here, invite experts, set aside several hours to go through. The first would be environmental topics, and that would include hydrogeology and groundwater impacts, drawdown impacts on adjacent properties, stormwater runoff, impacts on surface waters, and also the issue, because we're looking at opportunities too, is it an opportunity for reservoir uses, or are there some potential benefits that we could look at, and that would come under environmental. And then, weeks after that, having a workshop strictly on traffic and nuisance issues. And we get into a lot of the nuisance issues that we've talked about before that are off-site and traffic and the hauling aspect. Have a third public workshop on compatibility and notice issues. That's been kind of an ongoing theme and some concerns. And then a fourth and possibly final workshop on compliance and enforcement issues. And tightening up, putting more teeth into that, specifying who does what, a little more on that, and also looking at the issue, kind of a sub-issue there is existing mining operations now get an annual mining permit renewal. Might there be some enforcement and compliance regulations that can apply to some of the existing operations? In other words, they're approved and they can continue to do the operation they're approved for, but there may be some requirements that can apply to existing mines that relate to compliance and enforcement. So there's some aspects we could go over for that, and that's how we see the 4 issues breaking down into 4 public workshops after the mobile workshop. And then at that point, there would need to be a meeting after the 4th workshop of the Planning and Zoning Commission to come up with a recommended slate of regulation changes, and to take that to the Board of County Commissioners, get their direction at that point, and then go through the formal adoption process after they've had a chance to look at your slate of recommendations, essentially. If you lay that all out, this is the schedule that we've come up with.
If in fact compliance, for instance, becomes good, bad, or indifferent, or painfully obvious that in traffic or some of the earlier workshops, and we deal with it at that time, would we likely drop? I mean, is there a possibility of dropping the 4th workshop? I mean, if we get far enough into this, compliance deals with a lot of the nuisances and traffic more so than environmental.
Right. I think
cut your time close too, isn't it? At the 4th workshop.
Well, what we have here, any opportunities we have to compress the time frames here, we're open to.
But you're pointing out that more than likely it's going to be spread out longer than the initial time frame of 6 months because of what's got to happen after we gather information and then pass it on.
Once we laid this all out and looked at the amount of time that it might take, and it might take time to bring in people that we need to do presentations and so forth. This schedule definitely would go beyond the 6-month moratorium and would require an extension. Again, anything we can do to compress time frames, we can, but we didn't want to, and that's part of the feedback we'd like to get from you all tonight. If this is, a workable schedule, if it can be compressed. Some of the other issues are if you all want these workshops during the day or at night, or a mix, if that matters to you or not. And the other thing I'd like to get some feedback from you all tonight is if we can possibly, and I think we really want you all and the Board of County Commissioners to be on this mobile workshop, some possible days in
What is the best day of the week for you all?
Yes.
I mean, thinking through Tuesday's their meeting day. But
Mondays and Tuesdays are bad.
I mean, I was thinking usually Wednesdays midweek is in the past week, I think. Or
Wednesday is the Sebastian City Council meeting, and I know they want to be involved.
So it sounds like Thursday or Friday we're narrowing it down to already.
Thursday and Friday's fine with me.
Which narrows it down to Thursday probably. So are you talking the first Thursday in February? Or
Well, we have some logistics to take care of. We have to really make sure that we have the opportunity to get into the mines. We really would like to take you to the Dickerson pit. That is I think that'll be an eye-opening operation. So some of the questions you had today, The current excavation they have right now is 112 acre compared to our 20. And you would not believe, they have it dewatered and just a limited number of pumps. But it's, you really need to see it.
Would you like to move out 3 weeks from today, before we start looking at calendars, or?
Here's what I would like to do for tonight. First of all, is to get whatever feedback y'all want to give me on the schedule, but I would like to get some tentative dates, potential dates, I'll say, for first the mobile workshop. For instance, for the mobile workshop, P&Z and board, a Wednesday might work fine for that. Obviously, that's going to be during the day, and we'll need to check with the board calendar, but pick a couple of, I don't know if Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, any of those days for a mobile workshop work for you all, or just Wednesdays?
Just take one.
What,
they all work.
What day of the month, what date?
Well, again, if you're looking at the schedule that we've passed out here, we're looking for, mid-February, one of the 2 weeks in the middle of February is when we'd like to do that.
Thursday is the 7th, so the second one would be
the 6th, 7th, and 8th are fine by me. The 15th is not. That Friday, the
6th is not okay with me.
Out of town.
Okay, so
Are we going to have a regular P&Z meeting at that time too, or is this?
the Thursday, the 7th sounds good to me.
That's not, but the reason I was asking, that's 2 weeks.
The 7th, it would be okay with me. I come back on the 6th.
Right, okay. But can you all, I was asking staff, they were talking about logistics. They've got 2 weeks to pull all this together.
Well, then they'll decide it'll be the first Thursday, which will be the 7th, or the second Thursday.
Have you discussed this with the people at Dickerson?
Yeah, I've mentioned it to a representative, and they seem to think that would work out. Obviously, we need to contact them, and the board members' schedules will be quite a factor, I'm sure. Figuring out a date we can do it.
Let me try this. Is everybody open on any Wednesday? Is like if we said Wednesdays are good days, is any Wednesday okay?
I could arrange Wednesdays, not a
I'll
problem.
make it work.
Especially the afternoons.
I know you've got Sebastian.
I'll make it work.
Okay. That gives you a litany of 4 straight days. I think that, probably most Thursdays are open, but.
Well, if we do a morning thing, then Sebastian City Council meetings are at night, so that would not impact their schedule.
There you go.
Well,
I can do it all Wednesdays except the 20th.
Let's go.
I'm thinking they want to get closer to the middle
the majority
of
of
the
us will
month.
be able to do it Wednesdays or Thursdays.
The 6th, 7th, or 8th is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the 13th, 14th.
I think I've got some feedback. What I'll do is take this and work with the board office, and I've got y'all as an email group, and we'll start emailing back and forth a little bit.
Great.
The odds are, if you roll forward, those same kind of follow that pattern from month to month, it probably will be.
you can plan ahead.
Plan ahead a little bit, and we might make it. If we start on like the second Thursday or so, or we start kind of hold to something, it might be good.
Let me just say this too. The mobile workshop might very well be in 2 segments on the same day. Again, I don't know how long it's going to take, but our idea was to see the what's basically a coquina operation in North St. Lucie, which is what we might be typical of what we would see here in the future, and then a sand mining operation here in this county. So visiting 2 sites and getting a feel, because we think that'll represent what we have been seeing and what we're likely to see. So it might be more than just a morning or an afternoon. I'm not sure how long it'll take.
Are you talking about a sand mine then that would be kind of in the ag area? Out west, or are you talking about in town? The reason being is that part of the dilemma is we're in a transition mode between what was inside the urban service area, where you heard these guys talking, they kind of coordinated, they've worked, and we've had not that many complaints around residential because they've faced that. But we've moved into an area, then part of, I think, the problem is we've moved into what is perceived as an ag area that doesn't have much development around it, although we have lots potentially nearby, and it's kind of where, it's the less restrictive in the minds of the operators. And then you go farther west, it's even less restrictive.
If the commission
the rules may be the same, there's nobody out there looking.
Right. If you all would prefer, we'll try to find a site like that in the county. That's
I
not a
can
problem.
tell you the site, but that's...
No, we'll find one, but...
Oh, look who's here.
Look at this. Public
Moses has come to the
participation.
mountain.
Well, we really didn't ask for public participation, so it's not fair, but yeah, go ahead. I know it. I know. Go ahead.
Come on down, as a man said.
Good evening, Mr. Hamner, sir.
Yes, sir.
And Mrs. Keys, I am Bob Yulovich. I truly do live. Karnes Sand Mine is proposed to be located on an 80-acre site in the middle of the St. John's Improvement District. That's in a proposed state. So if you want to see, as George is saying, a futuristic site as to, as you watch that wave move westward, then I would offer up that I would give you the...
Right, Stan, it's all right, we'll talk about it. I'm thinking Presley's got one operation, we've got the stuff west, you've got that one that's potentially down the road, you've got the one on Ditch 5 that was Cobb's old one that's kind of, I'm not even sure they're
Right off
operating
Oslo,
anymore,
right,
but,
West 95.
And I would offer up, Stan and Bob, I'm presuming you don't throw my comments away, I would offer up my comments, my preliminary comments on Karnes as a primer on some of the basic things that you'd want to ask and know about it from, not from the operational point, but from a water quality, from a environmental.
When we do the environmental workshop, which is in this list we're looking at, Bob, this is it'll be probably early in March.
Yeah, I mean, because that'll
be a really good thing for everybody.
Yeah, there's a lot of skins to that onion, George, as far as regulatory, and I don't want to belabor the point, but, we got to make sure that we're all in sync. The water management districts, the improvement districts, the county, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and what I found interesting about Tom's presentation is a lot of people don't realize that we didn't get into a regulatory environment in this state until 1977 with the creation of water management districts.
Right.
So my time predates that. So I just offered up my services on that regard.
Thank you.
It sounds like you have a volunteer for at least one volunteer presenter for that workshop.
Already lined up, right? Okay.
Bob or Stan, I would suggest, and I would like to see a little bit of a change in this format, in that I would like to see enforcement not necessarily being an isolated workshop or an individual issue, but that it would be worked in to the other workshops as it could affect each one of those items. I think, to me, enforcement is a major issue associated with this. Compliance by the people at work, but obviously you even have experts here.
Would you look at it like to some extent we're isolating the problems like environmental or roads, et cetera. And take at the tail end of each meeting deal with enforcement maybe after
That's exactly what
where we deal with enforcement with environment, enforcement with roads, and enforcement. I don't know. I like it. I'm fine with it, but I'm not sure we don't knock out a workshop that way. But which is what I meant early on. But
I think you could also bring in monitoring, which is sort of enforcement. You have to know what you're enforcing, and so I think monitoring water quality, quality of life, all these issues should be part of it.
Water management already.
Roland, I think, is under you, right? Yeah. Yes. So you deal with this all the time, but the only thing that does pique my interest in this is that when you're talking about specific things, the curiosity and your memory works. My memory works better. I wait till 2 months later, and I don't know what I'm supposed to enforce either. So, it might be better to tie them in if Roland had the time to, and you all to do that. Or is that, is there a concern about that? Or
No. I think we can tie them in, or we can have it separately. I think one of the reasons we're looking at it separately, there are some big issues relating to enforcement and compliance. Do we keep bonding, and then do we pull bonds when there are violations, or do we structure some kind of mechanism where we can suspend permits or revoke permits? We've got some big picture issues here. It's amazing. Last week, that the Board of County Commissioners called the bond on one of the 82nd Avenue mines. That's only the second time I know.
I didn't know that they did.
Yes.
But he
posted a new bond, and he's still in operation. But that's only the second time I know of with a bond being called. The other time a bond was being called was an environmental matter. Dennis Smith's pit when he was discharging off-site.
Let me ask you a question, Greg. If we have, I think that that enforcement does dovetail with each individual item, no question about it. But in the end, we may need something on enforcement just once you've kind of gathered that information about how you handle the enforcement on trucks, or do you handle it? Now we've got to deal with, I'm not sure on the end,
Bring it all
end of
together.
roads.
Bring it all the way
We want
down.
to talk about bond. I mean,
Bring it
maybe we
together.
do need that last one.
Step it down.
I don't have a problem.
But you want to make sure we touch on it as we
Last one at
go.
all. If you look at the individual items associated with each one of these workshops, volume and type of traffic, I want to know what the enforcement is when we talk about volumes and
Yeah,
type
we'll get into
of
that.
traffic. Each one of these issues that I see here, there
We
are
need-
very few that are
What we
not going to
did,
be an issue.
we don't have to get to the big
How's the
picture till
enforcement?
later.
What's the enforcement? Who does it? How does it work? How are we going to make sure compliance occurs ourselves instead of depending on the good company versus the bad company?
And actually, that might actually dovetail into what I was suggesting at the beginning, is at the end of every workshop, what regulations might come out of this?
Right.
How do you actually apply? Is there a consensus? And a lot of times that might be a compliance type of issue.
Code revisions or additions.
I think we do need to have a time at the end of every workshop to compile things, essentially.
All right, so you're going to get back to us on the date. We'll start with the mobile workshop, then we'll worry about, you've kind of laid out a schedule
Wednesday,
for
Thursday,
us,
Friday,
and
February.
we'll lay out the timing from
now-
there.
Right, and do you all, at least for the first workshop, say on environmental issues, we have it
What
sometime
day
in
or
early
night?
March, are you looking for day or night?
I think evening.
Evening?
Public's going to look for evening, that's for sure.
I think the environmental one, we actually are going to have some experts that we might have to defer.
We probably are
their
going to have to,
schedule.
we may have to do it during the afternoon or.
But you prefer evening, is what I'm hearing from this. Okay.
I think that in the end, it's probably better, although they haven't been to an all-day workshop yet, and we're not going through any all-nighters here. Oh. So,
All right. Well, if you ever feel tired, you can look at that one point I had in one of my highlights, that the last mine approved in Lee County, a combined process of 14 days of public hearings just for one application. So if you're feeling down about the number of meetings, you can look at that, I guess.
I must have missed that one.
Yeah. Okay, I think I've got the feedback I need to move forward with the schedule. The only other thing that I wanted to point out under planning matters, you have your green sheet here, a presentation notice. On the 31st at 2 o'clock, there's a meeting at the Richardson Center on school concurrency you may be interested in. But before that, at noon, there'll be a presentation, and sponsored by the Ag Advisory Committee, on Dr. Jim Nicholas will be speaking on transfer development rights. So you may be interested actually in both of those that are going on at the Richardson Center on the 31st, and we wanted to give you a special notice of that.
Okay, thank you.
On the mobile workshop, could we have a way of reclamation to,
Right, the
not
one-
necessarily taken off the sand ridge? I mean, I can understand that you just sort of flattened it out.
And actually down there at the Dickerson's great because you get to see a large active operation, you get to see a restored operation, and you actually get to see a dredged operation.
All three in the one.
Yeah,
And they have a crusher, you get to hear
Yes.
that.
That's right.
that's excellent,
whole
yeah.
thing.
Attorneys matters, Mr. Glenn? Oh, yeah, Bob. In between attorney matters.
I was trying to get your attention when Stan was mentioning to you. I'm Bob Adair with the Agricultural Advisory Committee. We're having Sidney Bacchus come to the county on February 7th, which is a Thursday. I heard an excellent presentation tonight on practical aspects of sand mining. I was wanting to suggest to you that possibly she could make a similar type presentation on hydroecology, maybe 15, 20 minutes on February 7th, and she'll be here looking at the hydrology in the county on the 6th, and so she would be able to possibly summarize some of her findings, maybe also to be able to answer any questions. And so I was going to ask for your permission that we could do two tasks at the same time, have the Agricultural Advisory Committee sit in back here, listen to her presentation. At the same time, you'd be able to hear her evaluations of what she's seen in the county.
We'll have to see how it plays out, because one thing that's important in this, Bob, is that when we do these, like we have this public workshop, we don't string it out, chop it up too much, because we need to keep it all compact, because when we announce it, people that have a problem with mining, educationally, it's fine for us, but I think it's probably, if you're going to use somebody like her, you really need the public to hear it as well.
I wouldn't want to limit the fact that she wouldn't be coming back, just as a preliminary.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
All right.
A regular scheduled planning and zoning meeting, right?
That's what we were talking about. Yeah, and I don't mind that. We don't want to. When we do the environmental, I'm thinking that's when you have a high, you get a couple of sides of different people all at one time.
So even though it's not a workshop, though, is she going to do a presentation that we can attend?
Well, I was suggesting that she did the presentation in concurrent with your meeting.
When they see what we've got, I don't know.
The P&Z does not meet on February 7th. The normal meeting is on the 14th. And what would be good if we can coordinate it is to have her give a presentation to the Ag Advisory Committee, during a day meeting or whatever, and then a workshop that same night. I'm trying to coordinate having that happen. The schedule we have here would be after the mobile workshop in March. I don't know if that can work out or not, but.
I don't know. But I mean, I think
we think it'd be good to have a couple of different,
kind of two or three different opinions and have them all at the same time.
Right. Have a couple of hydrologists give
right.
and
pro con or whatever, if there is such a thing. I don't know.
I'm sure there is.
I'm sure. Bob, thank you.
Okay, what's your pleasure on this? Should I ask her to do that, or?
We're not having a meeting. We're not meeting. So you need to schedule something and let us know so we can come to your meeting.
Okay, so we will probably try to do that Thursday night, February 7th. I'll give you more details. Thank you.
Attorney's matters?
No.
Well, I have a question of the attorney, though.
Can we close the meeting, Mr. Chairman?
No.
Yeah.
Now, actually, this was brought up last night. Are we allowed to discuss this with other organizations? I mean, if I went to a Natural Resource Council, could I discuss this with them? Does everything have to be in the sunshine, or what's the game here?
Well, you definitely don't want to have any conversations with any of your fellow commissioners, but this is a legislative...
I don't like them anyway.
That's good. It's legislative policy making, so you're free to go ahead and contact and talk to other groups and other interested parties.
And if I go to a presentation and Mr. Hamner's also there, as long as we don't talk?
That's fine.
Thank you.
Any change, right? Any other comments for our attorney? If not, we stand adjourned. Let's go home.